All righty, thanks everyone for joining tonight. Thank you. So just so we know what's going to happen is I'm going to give a presentation, it goes for about half an hour, about widgets. You don't need your laptops for this one, so feel free to shut the lids and save your battery because you'll need them for the second part. In the second part, we're going to go and build some widgets ourselves. I'll step you through the code gradually so you can build with widgets, and then Kartik's going to take over and we're going to add Gemini to those widgets so you can see how the two things combine. So first up, I'm going to do a lot of talking. And as I mentioned, I've got links and lots of stuff for all these slides, so you don't need to take notes or anything. You can grab them later. And I will go through it again when we actually get to the hands-on section. So as mentioned, my name's Katie. I, along with Kartik, we're both GDEs, which is Google Developer Experts in Android. We actually also work for both the same company at Billu. We're mobile consultants, so we build mobile apps for a living. So this is something that we like to do, and we end up doing it in our off time as well. So what's a widget? If you haven't used an Android device in the last 10 years, because we've had widgets in Android for 10 years, you might not be familiar with widgets. Pretty recently, some other people have learned what a widget is. And it's a small interactive application that sits on our home screen. It gives you that at a glance information. You open your home screen, you can take a look at it. Just think about your weather widget or even your clock. It's a customization of the home screen. So this is how you can make the home screen look exactly how you want with the information that's really important to you. Is it important to you to show 2 time zones, maybe one with your family back home and one with you here in Brisbane? Or is it really important for you to show the weather in all possible locations? Or do you want to show your sports scores? So we need to show up-to-date information. What's the weather like now? Or what is it going to be in the future? We don't really care about the past. And what do you want to know frequently? What's important to come back to again and again? There are lots of different types of widgets. There's the purely informational widgets. These ones, as I mentioned, like your weather, your clock, your sports scores, just general, what is this information? You generally tap to open more and get more detail. Then there's also collection widgets. So these are things that might be your recent emails or your agenda for today or your recent photos. They are things you might want to scroll through, just take a little look. You might want to open individual items. There's control widgets for maybe your smart home or for your music player. These ones, you want to do something, you want to interact with them. We also have hybrid widgets, which some apps have, where there's a mess of all these different things. And I kind of think if you've got a hybrid widget, are you really just building a small app on the home screen? And I would recommend to stay away from hybrid widgets. If you're going to build some for an app that you're working on, you want to make sure that the user can choose what part of information is important to them. Do you want to just have, do you want to show this piece of information at the top? Do you want to have these controls? Not many people will want to use everything, and it's just taking up valuable space in their home screen. So we need to really think about what we're including in a widget. So when we're thinking about designing these widgets, we're thinking that widgets are a teaser for the app. It's a little bit of information, the app has more. The information on the widget is the snack, while the app is the full meal. We've only got a little bit that we need. We want to make sure that our app shows more detail than the widget, because otherwise, why bother having the app at all? And we want to get people involved in our app, especially if you've got things like ads or, in-app payments. We want to provide navigation links to frequently used parts of our app so that you can jump straight into a section rather than having to go through the home page of your app, through other sections. You can jump right into that information that's important to you. You want to make sure your widget is resizable so the user can customize their home screen, whether they're on a phone or a tablet or a foldable device. And we want to make sure it's responsive. This means that as we resize the widget, it will adjust based on that size and shape. So we look at these example widgets here. These are weather widgets. The small square one just shows the current temperature, and then the min and max. This portrait one, it shows the weather that's coming up. And if I put the same widget in horizontal mode, it's showing me the weather over different times of the day. So depending on how big I make this widget and what shape, it will give me different information. So the same widget can do all these things. There are quite a few limitations with widgets. They must coexist with the home screen navigation. So this means that the only gestures that we have are touch and vertical swipe. Because otherwise, if we had a horizontal swipe within our widget, it would interact with the horizontal swipe of the home screen. And the home screen also has long press. So if we had long press on our widget, then it would interact poorly with the home screen. We also have limited available UI elements. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but we only have a few that we can use, and not everything you can use in an app can you use in a widget. There's also the update frequency. This is something important as well, especially if you're showing up-to-date information. There's a very simple way of doing this, and I'll touch on it briefly to update your widget. And the minimum for that is every 30 minutes, so you can't go more frequently than that. And if you use the work manager way, which is what we're going to use in the workshop, this minimum is 15 minutes, so you can't go more frequently. So you can't have an app that's going to update, can't have a widget that's going to update every minute. Maybe direct them to your app if that's the case, but you don't want to have a widget that's on your home screen updating every minute or every second, draining your battery. So that's why these limitations are in place. It's so that we make sure that we're thinking about the user's battery, we're not going to drain them unnecessarily, and there's other things you can do as well to further help them and not drain their battery and use up their device resources. And there is ways of doing it more frequently, but it's a lot more complex to code, and yeah, we'll just eat all the power. So why am I saying that widgets are hot right now? And that's because another platform out there has recently discovered widgets, and suddenly they're like, oh, there's this wonderful thing called widgets. And all of us in Android land are like, what? We had that 10 years ago. I remember my first Android device, which was over 10 years ago, had widgets, and it was just normal. But now that the other platform has widgets, suddenly all our clients and people wanting to make apps are like, oh, well, we're going to put widgets on the other platform. We might as well have it on Android as well. It's like, yeah, we know. And if we want to make sure that our widgets are better than theirs, we've got to learn how to do it, and we've got all the tools for it because it's a well-established platform for Android. And why specifically am I into widgets? Well, I made this app called Payday, and it has widgets. And I thought this would be super simple. A colleague and I had the same idea. He ended up building it for Mac OS, and I built it for Android. And we're like, okay, we'll get this done in like 10 hours, no problem, easy. Took considerably longer than that. I ended up doing a lot of investigation into widgets and the results of this talk. I eventually got it out. It's actually shipped now. It's an app where you just put in like your daily rate if you're a contractor or something like that, and then you can see how much money you're earning each day or each hour or each week, and how much of a percentage you're through the day. And I thought it was a pretty cool idea, and if you're money motivated, it might keep you motivated. And I thought that was a perfect thing to have on a home screen. So you could see where you're up to, see percentage, pretty cool, pretty easy. Doesn't actually connect to any financial stuff. People just enter their own information. And yeah, it was pretty easy, but I got stuck on the widgets. So not quite so easy and quick. How do we go about building a widget? Well, there's all these different building blocks. There's a recipe of the things you need, and we will be going through these several times today. And there's a lot of building blocks, but we can break them down. We've got the UI. We've got making widgets work, making the operating system understand if there's a widget there that I can use. There's the data and the updating. And there's theming. I've separated theming a little bit out of the UI just because there's some really interesting things you can do. And you don't necessarily need it to build a basic UI. So first of all, we're going to talk about that UI. So in the past, if you've been developing Android before, I'll just get maybe some levels of, has anybody done some Android development before? Yeah, quite a few people. Anybody this is new? Yeah, okay, that's cool. So you won't have to worry too much about the past, but I'll give you a little history. So we used to have the Vue-based system, and that's when we were building UIs for Android. We used Vue, which was all XML, pretty hard to develop for. Then we got this new thing, Jetpack Compose. So we just used to use views. It's the non-Jetpack Compose way of building widgets. It uses this thing called remote views, which was an even more restricted version of views. And it's restricted just because it needs to be power efficient on the home screen. So we only had limited UI components available to us. Again, we don't want to interact too much with the home screen. We want to make sure it is really performant on the home screen, so they didn't let you do everything. And a recommendation, I'll have lots of links up to this later. If you are looking into widgets, go and read the Vue docs because they're much more extensive than the Jetpack Compose ones, the Glance ones that we're going to talk about mostly today. But a lot of the information is still the same. So definitely don't discount this part. There's a lovely diagram here. This is the old Vue-based system. So this is just telling us the pieces we need, similar to my recipe before. We're essentially getting rid of the Vue section, but we're still going to care about the rest. So right now, we have widgets with Glance. And Glance is the version of Jetpack Compose that allows us to build our UI. So it's a declarative UI. It's a way of building our UI using composables. Composables are just building blocks of our UI. And if you have used Jetpack Compose before, it's pretty much the same. You'll do fine. It really optimizes performance. It makes sure that when we're updating, we only rebuild what we need. It's compatible with Android 12 and earlier versions as well, so that's really good. Minimal code. We don't have to build everything, which is really good. And it's really customizable. So we'll talk about this later, but we can match our app branding. We can even match the device theme. And the integration is really good with the rest of our app. So you can use a lot of the things that you're familiar with and you only have to build things once. So it's really cool. Whereas with the old version, you did have to kind of duplicate a lot of code. So if we're going to go and build things with Glance, we have separate dependencies. So they're different to the usual Jetpack Compose dependencies. So you can see they've got Glance in the title here. So we have interoperability with Material 3 and Material 2, which are the design languages for Android. These are specific. They use remote views under the hood. So this is why we have restricted components. So if something didn't work in remote views, then it's not going to work with Glance. So again, we have restricted components. We have those limitations I mentioned earlier. There's also preview limitations. So we'll talk about previews in a bit, but you can't do nearly as much with a Glance preview as you could with the Jetpack Compose preview. We don't really need to worry about it too much just for what we're doing today. But if you start looking into this and you come up to some roadblocks and you're like, oh, can't copy and paste code that I was expecting, this is why. So if we're going to build a simple UI, what we need to have is we need to create a Glance app widget. I call it, in this case, my widget. I provide the Glance. So I need to put some data loading here potentially. And I provide my content. So just in here is where I place my composables. Similar to Jetpack Compose, we put them in here. We can break them down into smaller pieces to make it easier. So something like this, if I was putting the composables in, I passed in some variables to, in this particular case, passing in my rate. I've got display mode, got a modifier. In Jetpack Compose and Glance, we have modifiers. This allows us to modify the look and feel of a component. If you've done any web development, a bit like CSS. So I've got a box here, I've got an image, I've applied some modifiers, I've aligned some things, pretty straightforward. But not everything is exactly the same as Jetpack Compose. If you notice, modifier is now Glance modifier. That's important because we don't have everything we're used to. See that's different there. Color is now color provider, which again, was something I was like, why is this different? I don't know. But it's pretty easy. You can just wrap it in color provider. Something simple like text has a lot fewer options. For example, I wanted to use this nice custom font. We can see here on this side was from my app, and the little nice custom font was cool, but I can't access that. So in my widget, I had to use boring old Roboto. I think it's supposed to be so that it matches with the other home screen icons, but yeah, that was a bit sad because I like the other font. So you can't have all the things that you're used to. So my most common frustrations with Glance is that you just can't reuse your app UI. So you might think these things look very similar. Can't I just copy and paste the code? No, I can't do that. Because you'll get these fun errors like argument type mismatch. Actual type is glance modifier. Modifier is expected, and sort of the reverse of that sometimes as well. And that's because you're trying to use the wrong type. You get these other errors. This one's from one of the previews. And it has this fun thing of failed to instantiate one or more classes. And then it will tell me a whole bunch of exception, which has actually nothing to do with what I'm trying to do. It took me a long time to work out what was happening. In this case, I was just trying to use the wrong type of composable. So if we look here at the imports that we need when we're building our UI, on our widget side, we're using Glance. On our app side, we're using Compose. So you'll very frequently accidentally import the wrong one, and you'll get some of these errors. I 100% guarantee all of you will do this tonight. It's just a matter of once you know to look out for it, and you won't spend ages tearing your hair out like I did. So definitely go check at which ones you're importing. And Kartik and I will be able to help you with that if you get stuck. We can see that we have very similar named things, but they have different imports. So box is there, column is there, row is there. And some just don't exist. So this is just a real simple sample, but a whole bunch of these don't exist that I could use in my widget. You find ways around it. So if we've got our basic UI happening, that's okay. Then we need to look and see how we can make the widgets work. So back to this diagram. I've replaced this with Jetpack Compose and Glance. That's cool. I'm going to talk about Glance App Widget Receiver. If you've used Android back in the past, you might remember broadcast receivers. We're not using those anymore. We're now going to use a Glance App Widget Receiver. We're also going to use coroutine workers as well. So we need to first tell our operating system that a widget is available. We're going to have some XML. We are not getting completely away from the XML. So we need widget info, which is an app widget provider. This is going to tell the operating system what we have. In here, we have an initial layout. This is telling us we're going to use just the default one here, which is just a loading circle. You can put whatever you like here if you want, but just start off with the default one. We also have our widget description. This tells the user, oh, okay, this is what the widget does. We can also provide a preview. So an example of what the widget looks like. Again, invite the user to use it. We can also indicate whether we can resize this widget and what the ideal size is or what the initial size is. So in this case, this top one, top one was 1x4, and these ones down here are 2x2. So these are the ways I think that the widgets are best displayed. They will be added initially in this size, but then the user can resize from there. And I've said that they can resize it horizontal or vertical. We can also say that it's reconfigurable. This is when we can change the data source. So in this case, set what rate is available. I wish I earned $1 million a year. That would be lovely. So I can say it's reconfigurable, and I can pass in information about configuration. We'll talk about that a bit later. I can also set the update period, and this is how often the widget will try and update. This is the easy version I was referring to before. The minimum here is 30 minutes. We're not going to really use this tonight because we're going to do some fun things with AI. So we're going to use the other version. But if you are just making something really simple that you want to redraw every 30 minutes or even every day, every couple of hours, use this method. So our Glance App Widget Receiver. We just need a class called Glance App Widget Receiver, and then we can declare our UI. So I'm just passing my UI class in here. Pretty simple. You don't need anything else. We then have our app manifest. So we can just add our receiver in here. So we're just saying, here is my receiver. Here is the widget info file that we provided earlier, right down here. We're saying this is a widget update receiver. So every time the widget needs to update, it's going to call this. And then we have here our widget provider. If I want to get a little more complicated, we can access a whole bunch of other information of Glance App Widget Receiver, sorry. We can hook into all the different events that might happen with a widget. We can look at when we've added the first instance of a widget and when we've removed the last one. So you might want to do things like cancelling some data updates here, for example. We don't want to keep that running if the user doesn't have any of those widgets on their screen. Every time a new widget is added, we can enqueue that for data update here. We can also even look at when the widget size is updated, and maybe we might ask for more information. We might change the UI a little bit. we can hook into on app widgets options changed. I have simplified this a little bit here. We're not going to go into it too detailed today. There's a little bit more code that would be required to get the exact sizes and things like that. If you're really keen on that, come and talk to me. It took me a long time. This is not documented, this particular one. And it took me a long time to find all the information I needed. But if you're keen, reach out to me. We need to handle errors. We've got two types of errors. Recoverable errors. These are things where you've got some weird data and you're not sure how to display that. We can just detect that straight in our UI like we would with any other screen and display an error view. And we've got unrecoverable errors. So this is when you've made a mistake in the code and nothing's going to work. We want to still show something to the user, maybe telling them to remove and re-add the widget so it resets itself. We can provide, again, an XML layout here, something very simple. So now if we think we've got widgets working, the operating system is aware that they exist. What's next? Data and updating. This is where it gets complex. So widget configuration. So this is when we add a widget to the screen and we want to set the data source. We want to launch an activity and enable the user to select something. So we have to create a widget configuration activity. We just create that like any other activity. We're going to set that the action that's required is app widget configure. So the operating system knows to go find this one. But in our app widget provider, we provide a reference to this widget, so to this activity, sorry. And this means that every time we add the widget, it'll call this activity. We can also add on reconfigurable. This says every time the user long presses on the widget, we can call that activity again when they press that little pencil icon there. You can also change this to make configuration optional if you don't necessarily want the user every time they add a new widget to show the reconfiguration. Or you can do neither. You can exclude these and the user can't configure. That's totally fine depending on what your use case is. So if we're looking at widget data and state, when the data changes, it's the app's responsibility to notify the widget. So if the user maybe adds or removes some data on the app, we need to actually tell the widget about it. The widget otherwise won't know. So we can just use something like this. We can just update all of the widgets. They will all go and grab the new data and do their update. You can also go and do an update on a particular condition. You know, if it's only delete, we can go change it. So you can do this, and it's very easy to do from any place in your app. We're maintaining our state. We're just using preferences, which is just a key value pair. So what I'm doing here is I'm passing in a key, which is just a string. Then I get a value, which is also just a string. So you can see the integer value, it's already a string. We can use this, we can parse it, we can modify it. If you're using serialization, you can get more information from these, but everything's just strings in the basic version. In our actual widget itself, we can just go grab the current state, use the key and get the value out there. Pretty straightforward. So this uses something called preferences glance state definition. You're not going to have to worry about it too much tonight because we're going through the simple route. But there is an advanced version, again, not documented. I'm going to write some blog posts on this because I couldn't find it. But this is glance custom state definitions. And you can put a database behind these or a data store and have a custom model. You need to use serializable data types here and a few other bits of fancy footwork to make this work, but it does work quite well. And that's what I used for my app at the end. But it does get a lot more complex. So we want to make sure we're updating our widget on data save, data delete, app open, or periodically, every time something might have changed. So if we want to set the state, here's the example. For an immediate update, for example, on the configuration activity. So I've got a function here to set my widget data. I'm passing in some data, a data item here, got a widget ID. I use my Glance app widget manager, get my Glance ID from the app widget. I'm going to call the update state function we looked at earlier, set the values to the preferences, ask the widget to go and update itself now that I've actually set the state. And then I'm going to say to my activity, you're done. We've done the configuration. You can exit now. We're all good. What if we want a periodic update? we're going to use a coroutine worker, and this is what we're going to be using a little bit later. We can update the widget periodically in the background. And this is a coroutine worker, so it's going to run on a background thread. It's not going to lock up our UI. It can run whenever we want in the background. So in here, we pass some dependencies. If you have done a lot of Android development before, you may know about dependency injection. We can use dependency injection for this. With the simple way of updating, you don't get to use dependency injection. So if you're going to use things like repositories, view models, other data sources, access to the internet, this is the way you want to go. So we can pass in what we need. You won't need to worry about this too much today. We can specify the work name. So we want to make sure that in this case, I'm going to run this worker for all of the widgets at once. So I only need one unique name, but you could run this separately for different widgets and have them updating in a different schedule if you wanted to. You just have to make this unique. I'm going to queue some work. So I'm just going to say I'm going to run this every 15 minutes. This is the minimum amount of time for this particular type of updating. I've got some work policies. You don't have to worry too much about this, but we're just making sure that we're either updating an existing one or creating a new one. And then we need to make sure we've got a cancel function. So when we do remove all of the widgets, we cancel these updates. We don't want the user to remove all the widgets and then have this job running in the background every 15 minutes, which will just eat up all of their battery. So we want to fetch the current state and update new data. So we've got a function that's going to do the work. So here I'm again grabbing the widgets. So I'm going to grab all of the widgets of this type, loop through all of them, and then update the state, just like we did with the immediate update. I'm going to grab any data I need from my repository if I have any data in there, and then update the states. Then I'm going to trigger them all to update together. We can handle any errors, try a few back-off strategies if we're maybe connected to the internet or something. We want to make sure we retry this, but otherwise we can just return success. It's pretty straightforward. We can do this pretty easily. Now, if we want to do user interactions, we don't just want a widget that's going to sit there and do nothing. We might want the user to be able to click it, to be able to do things like control their music player, like turn on their smart home lights. So we can make it interactive. We can just load an activity. So just load the app at any particular point. We just have this action start activity. We just have to pass in the parameters about the activity and call it clickable up here and have action start activity, and we'll start it. So you can put this on a button. You can put it on the whole widget itself. It doesn't matter. It depends what you want to do with your widget. We can also start a service. So if you want some other data in the background to run, syncing with a server, syncing your songs, sync your photos, that sort of thing, you can run that in the background. We can also run a Lambda, so just run any type of operation. We do want to make sure in this particular case, when we're updating state here, that anything that's long running, we put out to something like a coroutine worker. We don't want to lock up our UI or make it really intensive by putting all of our data processing in a Lambda like this. We can also use a callback, action run callback. We'll use these later, which allows us to do some work off the thread as well. So we can use something like this. So if we've got our data and updating in hand, what's next? The theming. This is where it gets a little bit more interesting for me, at least. So we have Glance theme. And if you've been doing Android development, this is just like Material theme. Except it only works for color only. If you get it, we've got limitations. You need to use top level variables for your typography or your sizing, which is not so bad. It's pretty easy to manage. But we have a color scheme. It's a color provider again, like I mentioned. We can pass in our material themes that we may have used before. So in this case, my light scheme, my dark scheme, these are from my app. I haven't had to recreate them. So that's really good that I can reuse this part at least. So we can see I have a light version and a dark version. Don't judge my color picking of greens. I never claim to be good at UI. So then I can create my Glance theme here. And I'm going to set the colors. So I'm using this color scheme. So it means the widget will use these colors. And then I can access it just like Material theme. I can access the color, for example, background, pretty easy. And then I can use those ones. The system takes care of choosing whether to use light or dark, depending on whether the device is in light or dark mode. So if we have a look at this, my lovely green doesn't look so good against my purple background. So we want to make sure that we can blend in with the wallpaper. Now this doesn't work for all devices. It will only work for 12 and above. And I think some other manufacturers might not support this, but for those devices that do, we can actually make sure that our widget looks really nice with our wallpaper. So we can use this nice purple color for this example rather than the ugly green against the purple. So what we can do in our glance theme, we can say if it's supported, let's use the glance theme colors. And if you have an Android device and you've tried to long press before and change the wallpaper, you might also see that you can change the color scheme and make your colors sort of match nicely with your wallpaper and everything look really nice with your device theme. If you haven't done that, give it a shot because it looks really nice. So this will take those colors and use them for your widget. So it means it will blend nicely with everything else. So we can see it'll match nicely with our app icons. If you want to match exactly with the app icons with the foreground and background color, you can use widget background, that dark color behind, and then primary for the little icon that's in the center. So we can see that I've used that primary color here and that dark color here. So it matches really well. It looks like it's part of my home screen and blends in nicely and looks really good. What if we want to contrast from the background? If we look at this example, a bit weird on this screen even more, but this is actually a nice little picture of leaves. We can see that my widget's there. In this case, it's just this little heart and the word my widget. So I can see this, it's okay. But on this other background, we can't see my widget. It's hiding somewhere in there. And this looks the same on my screen. It's not just the color contrast of this projector. So we can't see this. And I am using the device theme in this particular widget. It just, because black is the primary color, it's just not visible. Again, if I do change the device theme, I change to a blue color. I thought, okay, maybe if I change to blue, it might be all right. Still can't see it. It's still gone. So what we can do is we can respond to the wallpaper color and have a look at what color would be a contrast. And this works when you've got a widget that has a transparent background, or it's going to show something over the wallpaper without any background color behind it. So we can grab the wallpaper manager. We can get the wallpaper colors from that manager. You can see I've used flag system here. That just means the standard system wallpaper. You can also get the lock screen wallpaper if you want to. I'm going to create this variable called use dark color on wallpaper. And for those that are new to Jetpack Compose and Android, we're creating a state here. This is a state variable. It's observable by the UI. The UI will respond to this variable. That's what this remember means. It's like, remember me. Every time I change, go and update something else. So we're initializing this to get this function called get use dark color on wallpaper. I should have renamed that. I'm passing in my colors and what type of wallpaper colors I want to look at. Then so that will work on initialization whenever the widget is added, but I want to make sure that if the user goes and changes their wallpaper, I also update. So I'm going to use a disposable effect. This means that we make sure that we run this every time. This is a coroutine every time we run this composable. And we also make sure that we clean up after ourselves when the user removes this widget completely. We pass in our wallpaper manager. So it's listening to the wallpaper manager, create a listener here, an on color change listener. So every time the colors change, I want to know about it. Calling my function again, get use dark color on wallpaper. Set that value here so that our UI will update. I want to add that listener down here and just make sure that loops every time it needs to. And then when we do remove all of the widgets, we can remove this listener. We don't need to care about the wallpaper anymore. So what's this function? This seems to be doing a lot of heavy lifting. What this does is we're passing in our colors, and then I'm looking at the colors and I can see if I've actually got colors. If it's null, I don't care. If somehow the system doesn't support this, all right. I make sure I've got the system colors. Now, I do have to look at the versions because it's a lot easier in newer versions. But if you're using Android 12 and above, you could just use this thing called color hints. And what this does is gives you this variable called hint supports dark text. So this is saying that this background supports dark text. So this means the operating system has looked at the wallpaper and said, yeah, I should use dark text against this wallpaper, or I should use light. And this is what controls whether you get a little white or a black label underneath your app icons. So we have this, we can just use this straight away. That's great, we can use this value. There's also one that supports dark theme. I'm not quite sure exactly what this one's for. I think it's for if it's a bit more complex that you're trying to use. But if we don't have one of these newer versions of Android and we need to actually do the maths here, we can go and grab the primary color for the wallpaper. You can also grab the secondary and the tertiary as well and do even more maths if you really want to. And you could do some really interesting things about your wallpaper if you want to. So I'm going to go and grab these values and then I'm going to pass it to color is dark advanced. I'm not going to go into the maths of how this works. I went to Stack Overflow. You can also ask Gemini to do this for you as well. But I just made it do the maths for me. I grabbed this answer of Stack Overflow. All this essentially does is returns, yes, use dark text or no, use light text, whatever is most contrasting over this particular color. So now my widget looks good, no matter which color of background I use. So we can see it, pretty cool. Now we've covered theming, some basic things we can do. We've covered the UI, making widgets work, and the data and updating. Pretty much the end, right? Easy and quick. We'll have to see if you guys are able to do it during the workshop. Here's some useful links. As I mentioned, all of this is available online and you'll see them soon. I did ship my app finally. Payday is out there. If you're very interested in it, feel free to go grab it. I did make it paid. It's like $4, I think. I'm still trying to make more than a coffee's amount from one of my apps. Not doing very well. One of my apps has 1 user. I think this one has 2. It's very exciting. I've doubled my user base.
Okay. What does your app do?
The one I shared about before. Yeah, I did say it about before. It's the one, this particular one is, it shows if you can put in your daily rate and show how much you earned for the day or something like that. It's a very silly thing, but it was very useful for demonstrating widgets, which is why I created it. So if you want to play around with it, feel free. But you can build your own, which is what we're going to do after this. I'm also planning on writing some blog posts on this, so keep an eye on my Medium as well. I'll get to them soon. Any questions about the general content?